You paid $212 last month to cool a house that your grandfather kept comfortable for free. $212 a month, around $850 across one summer, for air your grandfather made for nothing. And the worst part is that your house probably is not even that cool. You walk from the kitchen to the living room and feel the temperature swing. You sleep with a fan running anyway. You wake at 3 alarm in the morning and the air feels stale and heavy, like something is missing. Something is missing, and it is not a bigger air conditioner. My name is Eli, and after years of walking through Amish homes from Lancaster County to Holmes County with a notebook, I can tell you there's an $8 window setup that, in the right conditions, can drop the temperature in a room by 10 to 15 degrees. No compressor, no refrigerant, no electricity bill. The Amish used it in farmhouses for well over 100 years, and it still works today in a brick ranch built in 1968, a split level from 1974, or a house with vinyl windows put in last spring. This is for people who already own their home, not just people building from scratch. And do not click away before the very last detail, the copper penny from an 1847 ledger, because it is the one your great-grandmother would have known and almost nobody alive has heard. The first time I walked into one of these homes outside Millersburg, Ohio, on an August afternoon when the porch thermometer read 97, I spent 20 minutes looking for the thermostat. There was no thermostat. There was no hum of a machine. There was just a quiet, dry, comfortable kitchen, 2 women shelling beans, and a baby asleep in a basket. So let me show you exactly how they did it, and I'm going to be honest with you the whole way through, including about where these methods are powerful and where they are modest, because that honesty is the whole reason this channel exists. Here is what most people get wrong about cooling a house, and once you understand it, you cannot unsee it. They think the goal is to make cold air. It is not. The goal is to stop hot air from getting in and to move the hot air that is already inside back out of the house. That is the entire game. That is all of it. Every Amish technique I'm about to describe is built around that one simple principle: keep the heat out, push the heat out. And a modern air conditioner is built around the exact opposite principle, which is to seal the house up tight and then spend electricity manufacturing cold to fight the heat you trapped inside. That difference is a big part of why your electric bill looks the way it does every summer. And the single biggest place that hot air gets in is the window. Listen to this, because it surprises everyone. A single ordinary double-hung window in a wall that faces south on a sunny July afternoon brings in roughly as much heat as a 1,000 W space heater running at full blast. Read that again and let it land. A 1,000 W space heater. You would think a person was out of their mind if they ran a space heater in the living room in the middle of July. You would walk over and turn it off. But you let your windows do the very same thing for you every single day all summer long, and you pay to fight it with the air conditioner at the same time. You're heating and cooling the same room at once and paying for both. The Amish looked at that window and saw the problem first before they ever thought about making anything cold. They started by controlling the window, and so will you. That is where the $8 setup begins, and it has 3 parts, all from the same Amish tradition. A good deal of it was first written down by a county building inspector named Elias Hoover, who measured dozens of farmhouses in Lancaster County back in 1922. And I want you to understand who Hoover was because it matters. He was not Amish, he was not a believer or a romantic. He was a county man with a clipboard and a thermometer doing his job. He walked into Amish homes and recorded them sitting far cooler in the heat of the mid-afternoon than the English homes right next door. And these were houses of the same construction, the same year built, the same angle to the sun, the same everything, except how the people inside ran them. He wrote up what he measured in a short pamphlet, and that pamphlet quietly dropped out of the county extension office a couple of decades later, the way a lot of this knowledge quietly dropped out of circulation. The first technique he described is the one I want you to start with this very weekend because it is the cheapest and the simplest, and you can have it working before you go to bed tomorrow night. It is called the wet cloth window screen, and it costs about $8 to set up properly. You take a length of cotton sheeting and an old worn bedsheet works fine, though a couple of yards of muslin or a plain cotton flour sack works even better. You cut it to roughly the size of your window opening. You soak it in cool water with a little plain salt dissolved into it because the salt slows down the evaporation and helps keep the cloth from going musty and sour over the course of the day. Then you hang that damp cloth across the inside of the window frame on the shaded side of the house, not the sunny side, and you crack the window open a few inches at the bottom so the air has to come in through the cloth. That is the whole of the first part. No tools, no installation, a damp cloth, a cracked window on the shaded side. Now, here's the physics, because this audience does not take anything on faith and should not, and I would rather you understand why it works than just trust me that it does. As the outside air gets pulled through the damp cloth and into your room, the water held in the fabric evaporates, and evaporation always takes energy to happen, and the energy it takes has to come from somewhere. It comes straight out of the heat in the passing air. So the air gives up some of its heat to drive that evaporation, and it comes into your room cooler than it was on the other side of the cloth. It is the exact same thing that happens when you step out of a swimming pool on a warm day and a breeze hits your wet skin, and you suddenly feel cold, even shiver. The water leaving your skin is carrying your heat away with it. The wet cloth does that to the air before the air ever reaches you. But I'm going to be completely straight with you about how much, because the internet lies about this number constantly and shamelessly. Evaporative cooling is powerful when the air is dry, and it is modest when the air is humid, and there is no way around that. It is simple physics. In a genuinely dry climate, out in Arizona or New Mexico, that wet cloth can pull the incoming air down by 10, 12, even 15 degrees, and people in those states have honestly slashed their summer cooling bills with little more than this. But in a humid climate, in the Ohio Valley or down in the deep south in the thick of August, the air outside is already carrying about as much water as it can hold, so it cannot soak up much more from your cloth, and the cooling you get from the cloth alone is smaller, just a few degrees. I am not going to stand here and promise you a 15-degree drop off a wet sheet in a swamp, because it is not true. And the second somebody promises you a number that physics will not deliver, you should stop trusting everything else they say. What I will give you is the honest truth about how the air actually behaves, and then I will show you how to stack the second and third techniques on top of this one, so that even in heavy, humid air, you walk into that room and feel a real, genuine difference you can measure with a thermometer. But first, the history, because it explains why your grandmother knew all of this and you do not. Back around 1930, as mechanical air conditioning was just becoming a real industry, the companies building those machines faced a simple problem. They needed customers. And there's no harder customer to sell a big, expensive cooling machine to than a person who already keeps perfectly cool with a wet cloth, an open transom, and a propped cellar door for almost nothing. So the message that spread through that era, carried through the advertising of the day and through the home economics programs taught in the schools, was that all the old passive methods were backward and dirty and unscientific. Wet cloth in a window, a mold hazard, an open transom, a disease risk, the cool, breathing house your grandparents lived in, unsanitary, old-fashioned, beneath the modern family. None of it was true. The careful measurements of the era proved none of it was true. There was a federal study done across Appalachian farmhouses in the 1930s that documented serious, real cooling from these exact passive techniques. Drops large enough to make a sweltering house genuinely livable with no electricity and no machine anywhere in the building. Those numbers were real, and they simply did not circulate. They sat in an archive because nobody with money to spend had any reason at all to spread them around. Now, I want to be fair and honest with you here, the way I always try to be, because I am not in the business of selling you a cartoon. I am not going to tell you that a group of mustache-twirling villains sat together in a dark room and plotted to take away your comfort. The truth is quieter than that, and in a way it is sadder. The market simply did what a market does. It rewarded the thing that could be manufactured and sold and serviced and billed to you every single month, and it walked away from the that was free and could never be sold to you twice. Willis Carrier's machine, the first modern air conditioner, was invented back in 1902. And here is a detail most people never learn. It was not even built to cool people. It was built to pull humidity out of the air in a printing plant so the paper would not warp. Human comfort was an afterthought, but an entire enormous industry grew up around that machine, and that industry needed you dependent on it, needed you to believe that comfort came in a box you plugged into the wall and paid for forever. And a customer who still knew about wet cloths and transoms and cellar doors was not going to sign up for that. So the old knowledge faded out of the magazines, faded out of the school books, faded out of the building codes, until a whole generation grew up never having heard of any of it. The Amish kept every bit of it, not because they were rebels making a point, but because they were simply never paying attention to the campaign in the first place. They took the glossy pamphlets handed out at the county fairs. They nodded politely to the man at the booth. They carried the pamphlets home, and they used them to start the morning fire in the cook stove, and then they went right on doing what had always worked. The second part of the $8 setup is the transom. If you live in a house built before about 1940, you may still have one, a small hinged window above an interior door, usually painted shut and long forgotten. If your house is newer, you almost certainly do not have one, and you do not need one because there is a workaround I will get to in a moment. A transom, when open, lets the hottest air in a room rise out of it and travel up into the hallway and away through an upstairs window or a vent. Hot air rises. That music is grade school science. But when every door is shut and every transom is painted closed, that hot air has nowhere to go, so it sits on top of you and makes the feel far warmer than the thermometer says. The old Amish records describe exactly this whole house approach, and they describe it working hard in the worst heat. A midwife in Intercourse, Pennsylvania, working through the brutal heat waves of the 1930s, kept her upstairs rooms noticeably cooler than the blazing air outside using nothing but an open transom, a propped cellar door, a shuttered window on the sunny west side, and a damp cloth screen on the shaded east window. No electricity, no machine, just air moved on purpose, the way the house was meant to breathe. I want to be careful and not hand you an exaggerated number there because the exact figures in those old notes are impossible to verify, and physics has its limits, but the method itself is sound, and you can feel it work in your own home. Now, if you already own a house and you are thinking this only applies to people building from scratch, stay right with me, because this next part is built specifically for you. You probably do not have transoms over your interior doors. Almost no house built in the last 60 or 70 years does. But the function of a transom, moving hot air out of a room and up toward the ceiling of the hall, can be reproduced in any existing home with two cheap materials. Here's what you do. Take an ordinary box fan, the kind that costs under $20 at any farm supply store, and set it in the hallway just outside your bedroom door. Point it up toward the ceiling with the door open about a foot. Then open a window on the shaded side of the room on the opposite side of the house. The fan pulls the warm air up and out of the bedroom toward the hallway ceiling, and the cooler air from the shaded window flows in to take its place. You have just built yourself a transom out of nothing. Now add the wet cloth from earlier to that shaded window, and you have stacked two techniques on top of each other. The cloth cools the incoming air through evaporation, and the fan pulls the hot air up and away.